Welcome to our LGBT Recruitment and Retention webinar, welcoming untapped sources of qualified, inclusive, diverse, and safety-conscious firefighters. This is all sponsored by Scott Safety with support from PBI, Lion, Tincata, and the Motorola Foundation.
Can't hear you.
Can everyone hear me? All right. So once again, welcome to our LGBT Recruitment and Retention webinar. We're so excited to have you all here today. We have some great panelists that we'll introduce to you in a second. Really quickly, I'm going to go over some quick, basic control panel reviews. If you are having any technical difficulties, please use your chat box. You should have a menu button or a menu on your computer screen that looks like this. You can enter questions through chat. You will only be able to chat with our organizer. Please make sure that you have the correct audio option selected, either telephone or mic and speakers. You will be muted throughout the webinar, and only our panelists will be able to speak, and our presenter, Larry. Please turn off all radios, TVs, other electronic devices. If you do need to break away from the call, please either use your mute button or hang up and dial back in. Please do not put your phone on hold. Again, if you have any technical difficulties, please bring it to the attention of the organizer through chat. Today your moderator is going to be Larry Sagan, and your facilitators are Odessa Kawai and myself, Cami. Odessa is going to be monitoring the chat box, and I will be taking notes throughout the webinar. I'm going to turn it over to Larry real quick, and he's going to go over our agenda, and then we'll go on to introduce our panelists.
Good morning, everyone, or good afternoon, depending on what time zone you are in. The agenda today, we're going to introduce the panelists. We're then going to talk about some of the terms and acronyms used in referring to the LGBT community. We'll be talking about some of the issues in terms of LGBT members coming out on the job. We'll be addressing some of the myths about the lesbian, gay, bisexual, and transgendered communities. We'll talk a little bit about how to create a more inclusive culture at work. And finally, we'll get into recruiting more qualified, inclusive, diverse, and safety-conscious members from the LGBT community. We'll have questions at the end, but we also really are asking that people text or communicate through the chat box any questions that you have. Sorry, not text, but communicate through the chat box. So let's meet the panelists. I'd like to introduce you to Chief Jona Olsson. And just to let you know, Jona does in fact spell her name with small letters, so this is not a typo. Jona is the volunteer fire chief, completely volunteer, at Latir Fire Department in New Mexico. Jona is also the 2012 Volunteer Fire Chief of the Year. Captain Lana Moore is with the Columbus, Ohio Division of Fire. She's a captain there. Lana is bringing her personal story to the panel. She's transitioned from a male firefighter to a female fighter, and we'll talk about the experience and about the support and the environment that the Columbus Division of Fire created so that this was possible. And finally, our third panel member is firefighter Brett Dunckel, who is now with Broward County Sheriff Department, which is, what would you say, Brett, the holding company for the fire department in Broward County?
We're actually the first organization to meld the sheriff's office with the county's fire department under one umbrella organization.
Okay, great. And Brett is also the author, co-author of the book Coming Out From Behind the Badge, and we'll have a link to that in our resources section. So, Jona, why don't you take it away, and we'll give each of the panelists just a couple of minutes to introduce yourselves and talk a little bit about who you are and your work. Jona?
Thank you, Larry, and thanks to everyone who's taking the time today to participate in this webinar, and particularly thank my co-panelists for sharing this time. I guess the two things I wanted to say, one, you didn't mention in my bio that I am a 65-year-old white lesbian, so we'll just get that out there now. I'm also the founder and director of Cultural Bridges to Justice, and that's my paid job. And it is a consortium of fabulous and passionate justice trainers, and we do anti-oppression trainings, whether it be anti-racism, sexism, homophobia, transphobia, trainings for nonprofits, including fire and EMS, throughout North America and also the UK. I came out at a young age, but at a time, and I'm 65, so at a time as a teenager and in college, coming out at a time where we didn't have LGBT centers, we didn't have a conversation that was at all civil about these issues. So one of the pleasures of being the age I am now is seeing the progress that we have made on all of these issues, but clearly knowing that we still have much work to do on this. I came to the fire service late in my life, had been on several non-traditional jobs before that, so have had several experiences, both being female and in mostly male-dominated fields, and also being out in areas where that might not necessarily be as accepted as one would like. Enough about me.
Great. Next, Lana, you want to share a little bit about yourself with the participants?
Yes, and I would also like to thank Larry, Odessa, and Cami, and my fellow panelists, and everyone who joined us here today. I am a third-generation firefighter here in Columbus. I am a house captain, which means in addition to being a company commander, I am also the manager of a fire station. I transitioned 4 years ago from male to female, and I was convinced that I was going to have to retire because it was impossible to transition on a fire department. That's what I believed. And I just want to say that the City of Columbus and the Columbus Division of Fire treated me with such compassion and dignity that in some ways it actually became the perfect place to transition. And so, with that, I just wanted to also say I think I also bring an interesting perspective, as Jona mentioned, being female, being a woman on the fire department, which is kind of new to me, but it's really opened my eyes. And I think sometimes we talk about race and maybe LGBT, and sometimes the women are starting to get lost in the shuffle, but they're still quite a minority on most fire departments.
That's great. Thank you, Lena. So now let's open it up to Brett.
My name is Brett Dunckel. I'm a career firefighter paramedic, currently with the Broward Sheriff's Office Department of Fire and Rescue. That all came about a little over a year and a half ago through a merger. I previously worked with the City of Deerfield Beach Fire Department. Under that department, my title was Fire Prevention Captain. I was a line firefighter for about 7.5 years before going into fire prevention. Now with the Broward Sheriff's Office, I am currently assigned to fire prevention. However, I'm also sometimes, when need be, do go back to the trucks as a line firefighter. I've been in the service for almost 14 years. Prior to that, I was a fire explorer for many years. And I struggled throughout my career with my sexuality. When I started with the fire department, I was not out nor was there anybody on my department that was out, nor did I know anybody that was in the fire service who was out. And so it took many years of kind of, trying to reconcile the two and to see how I could continue my career in the fire service, yet live openly and honestly with everybody about my sexuality. So luckily for me, it's been a very good experience overall, and I'm very, very happy and well adjusted now. And then in order to try and help others with that process, I shared my story in a book called American Heroes, coming out from behind the badge, to show other people out there that it is possible to be firefighters, police officers, EMS professionals, and be LGBT. And then I also created an organization called You Can Be Anything to show youth that just because you may be LGBT does not mean that you're going to be restricted in the career that you choose to aspire to. So I'd like to thank Fire 2020 for all the work they do, not just with the LGBT people, but throughout the fire service and throughout the different diversity groups that are out there. So thank you.
And thank you to all three of our panel members. One of the things that we have the opportunity to do during these webinars is to poll the participants to get some real-time information and data. So we're going to throw up a very quick poll question, and for those of you who are on your computers, we ask if you could take just a moment and respond. This came from a conversation with Paul Flippen, who's on the call, and I really want to thank Paul. Paul works with TriData and really understands a lot of the issues around inclusion and diversity in the fire service. The question is, are the underrepresented groups in your department working together to address inclusion and diversity issues? And the question came out of a conversation that whether it's LGBT or African American, Hispanic, etc., they tend oftentimes to have separate groups. And the concept that I talk about is united we stand, divided we stay the same. And so the question is, in your department, are the underrepresented groups working together to address inclusion and diversity, or are they separate? Yes would mean they're working together. No would mean they're separate or there is no activity. Okay, so thank you very much. So just in real time, it looks like 46% of the people said yes, they are working together, and 54% said no. So this is just something we'd like you to be thinking about after this webinar when you go back to work in your respective departments, is how could the underrepresented groups, the minorities, women, LGBT, etc., be working more together. We're all working towards the same goal. So let's move into the topic of the webinar. One of the issues that comes up a lot is, what is the terminology? What does LGBT mean? What is this really all about, and how do we use language so that we don't offend each other and we're all on the same page? Jonah, you want to talk a little bit about that and just let us know to click through to the next slide?
Absolutely, sure. Thank you, Larry. And thank you for the behind-the-scenes Fire 2020 gals who are making this all work. So thank you for that. This will be a very short, very fast version of language and some terminology. and one of the pieces that we were talking about earlier is there was a lot of confusion about the language. Part of it is because some of this language is very new to us. So it's not, it's very understandable that we're still having some confusion, lack of clarity on some of the language. And let me say also there are going to be regional differences. I'm going to offer some of the language that we use. Most of this work comes from a wonderful group. You'll see at the bottom of the screen, the Center for Gender Sanity. You can look at gendersanity.com and get all the information that I'm going to offer today with some of our little cultural bridges to justice tweaks of it. But there will be regional differences, and I'm sure even for Lana and Brett, I'd love to talk to you later, there may be differences in some of this language. Before we start on this particular one, the question, Larry, you asked, the LGBT, what does that all mean? I would also add that in many regions of the country, it'll be LGBT and then Q, Q, and I. Q being either questioning for people of any age who may be questioning their sexual orientation, their gender identity. Q being queer, but a language that's being reclaimed, particularly in youth culture, to talk about all of the folks within this large alphabet soup, and intersex, I being intersex, which we'll take on here in just a second. So let's look at some of this terminology, and what I want to look at are basically 4 aspects that every human has, but related to these issues. So first, in the box that you see right there, one of the aspects of our humanness is our biological sex, which is determined, genitally by chromosome, etc. And we're used to the language female at one end of perhaps a continuum, as some people see it, or not, but female at one end and male at the other, and that's identified at birth. And intersex, for those that are not familiar with that word, some of you may be familiar with the old word, which was hermaphrodite, and intersex is used today generally in reference to people who are born with either ambiguous genitalia or some mixture or some not being able to easily identify a person's biological sex. Let me say at this point there's a whole lot more in this discussion, but we're trying to hold this to a very few minutes, and I'm sure any of us would be glad to answer questions on this at some point. So next slide, please. So a second aspect of every human is our gender identity, and that's the easiest way to say this is how my sense of myself, how do I feel, how do I identify? So again, at one end, woman, do you feel like a woman, do you feel like a man?
Yes, can I keep both?
I'm hearing you, Larry.
Sorry.
That's no problem. And then language that we won't spend a lot of time on right now, somewhere again in the middle, if we see this as a continuum or not just a duality of man-woman. Two-spirit, just very quickly, is a term that was brought to our language a decade or two ago, particularly by indigenous peoples. So again, longer conversation. And next slide. So gender expression, so if I identify, I have a sense of myself, of how I identify. How do I express that to others? What's my communication of my gender? So in the shortest form, what we can do, again, on some kind of continuum, at one end, do I express myself in what would be traditionally in the culture, in a feminine way or in a masculine way? And another old word that some are familiar with, androgynous, it's kind of a mixture of those two expressions or somewhere in that continuum. So all of us have these aspects, whether we think about it consciously or not. All of us have a biological sex, we all have a gender identity, the way we feel about ourselves, and we all express that gender identity in some way. And then there's I wish I had put in a big line here. Let's go to the next slide. Now we're talking about sexual orientation, which is a fourth aspect of every human, but they're not necessarily, our sexual orientation is not necessarily related to the three above. It's a separate aspect of our lives. And here we're talking about affectional, sexual orientation, romantic or erotic response. And again, at one end, you'll see attracted to men as an option. On the other side, attracted to women as an option. And in the middle, people who are attracted to both, bisexual or asexual, people that have no erotic attraction to either. Now, in particularly U.S. North American and many other cultures, there is an assumption, and if you hit the next click there, there's an assumption that the societal demand for us and the roles that we're expected to play is if you're born biologically female, you're supposed to feel like a woman, following the arrow down. You're supposed to express yourself in a very feminine way, and you're supposed to be attracted to men. Next click, please. And on the other side, again, the societal expectation and the demands that are placed on us by our society and the way we have been taught is if you're born biologically male, you're supposed to feel like a man your whole life. You're supposed to express yourself in a very masculine way, and you're supposed to be attracted to women. Now, if you'll just look visually at this slide, there is a reason we call that straight, that it's going to follow that straight down. And to be perfectly honest and frank about about people's lives is many people in our culture don't follow those straight lines down. So there's going to be all kinds of mix in people's lives. But again, this is a very short version of offering some of this language. And you'll see at the bottom, again, I'd like to refer you to gendersanity.com, and you can get a lot of really good information from them. It's one of the members of that is a former LA Fire Department officer who did transition on the job and then left the service. So it's someone also in fire service who is offering us some excellent information and excellent resources. Thanks, Larry.
Thanks, Jonah. Brett, do you have any thoughts at all about some of the language that you've experienced?
No, I think she covered it pretty well. But just know that there are many terms for the same thing, and we all, for the most part, understand that if somebody makes the error of using the incorrect term, it's most likely just for lack of an understanding or lack of intimate knowledge of that. So, at least for me personally, I've never really taken offense when somebody maybe inappropriately titles something.
Okay. What about the expression that's gotten a lot of publicity using the term, "oh, you're so gay," when somebody is not necessarily referring to a gay person? Brett? I kind of am a little bit out of the norm. I don't find it as offensive as I understand a lot of people do. I don't really have a reason for that. I guess I'm very open-minded in that sense, but in general, I can see it's very problematic, especially for younger people. When they're trying to identify themselves, they're going through all these terms in their head, and they're trying to put a label on themselves, and any kind of negative connotation that label might represent, that's just strongly reinforced when somebody makes a comment such as "you're so gay." It may have nothing to do with their sexuality, but just that negative connotation that it brings is, can be very detrimental to a young person who's struggling with their sexuality. Great.
Brett, oh, go ahead.
Go ahead, Jonah.
Well, I was just going to thank Brett for that, because I think one of the things that we need to focus on constantly, because we're in emergency services and we deal with young people every day, given the epidemic of teen suicide among LGBT teens in the United States, I think we need to be so completely aware that the language, even for us as adults, the language that no longer kind of rubs us the wrong way, perhaps, is still doing harm, is doing damage, particularly to young people, whether they identify as gay or trans or not. I hope that as adults we take some responsibility in interrupting that kind of language.
Lana, you bring an on-the-job transitioning in your life. In terms of language from the trans world, can you talk a little bit about that so that some of the participants on the webinar can have a better understanding?
Yes. Just to add on to a little bit of that last thing, though, like I think in addition, the language there, things like, you know, saying you're so gay, we might be like kind of desensitized to that, but we also have to remember that there can be a subtle message that people are fair game. And I know when I transitioned and made my announcement on our message board, one of the guys commented and was being supportive, and he made a little joke. And I felt the same way as Brad. It's like I wasn't offended by it, but my union president censored it, and he made a very good point. He said, I know that, you know, you feel like you want the guys to know it's okay to be comfortable enough to make a joke, but I don't want them to think that you're fair game. So I think that's always important for us to think about how words really make a difference. And I guess the first one for trans people is the word tranny. That's kind of like our version of the N-word, and a lot of people don't realize that, and even within our community. So it kind of circles back to the same kind of thing. A lot of people are like, you know, we got to be able to laugh at ourselves, but at the same time we have to realize that words really make a difference.
That's great, Lana. Thank you. It brings up a question that actually arose for me when we were doing some focus groups around the country. And we did a focus group with a group of LGBT firefighters, and they were saying that one of the issues that came up was language that firefighters had from an emergency response call. And this firefighter was out, a lesbian was out, and they were talking about a call they had made with two gay gentlemen, and she felt like they were really making fun of them. And I know that a lot of this comes up in a lot of situations, but how do you have a conversation with somebody who is less than informed? They may or they may not be saying this to you know, put somebody down, but how do you have a conversation with them? Jonah, do you have any thoughts on that?
I had to click my mic on, sorry. Well, a couple of initial responses. One is, as a chief, hopefully we've done the work in the department to set clear expectations, to role model that kind of stereotyping, that kind of put down, that kind of oppressive, prejudicial language is just not going to be accepted. That we have a mission, and the mission is to serve everyone in every one of our communities with respect. So that's, you know, going back and taking it from a leadership position, that needs to be done as well. But I think directly we need to be able to have these conversations. We need to be able to have part of our after action be not just what was the technical, what were the technical aspects of the tactics we used at the fire, or how we responded serving our patient with our technical EMS skills, but also to talk about the as some people call the softer side of this, but how did we respond to that particular patient. So there has to be a culture where that is acceptable to have that conversation and expected. But again, we just have to be able to be brave enough to bring it up and have some conversation. And I think, as both Brett and Lana said, if it's simple ignorance, and ignorance doesn't mean stupid, it simply means I don't know yet. So if comments are made out of ignorance, those are a lot easier to deal with if the person is willing to accept the conversation and some education. If they're not, if it's purposeful, purposely hurtful, then leadership needs to deal with that as well.
That's great, Jonah. Brett, Lana, do you have any other thoughts about that, possibly from a personal situation?
I've never personally faced any kind of confrontations that were, directly face-to-face with myself. I've heard some rumblings in the past, but that was with some individuals that were, uneducated in this sense of LGBT issues, and never really had any experience with anybody in their personal lives who was gay or lesbian. So I had a little bit of sympathy and understanding, just because I knew that they were coming from a place of fear and that they didn't understand the topic. They didn't understand what, they never had that personal experience. So I tried to educate the people around me and let them know that if they had questions related to being LGBT, that if they had the courage to ask a question, I would answer truthfully, and I would try and educate them. And I also tried to make it, if I heard something that I didn't necessarily agree with or that I thought was an inappropriate remark, I didn't try and make it a confrontational situation. I tried to make it an educational situation. And I think when you do that, it disarms people, and they're going to be a little more receptive to that learning process.
Lana, any quick summary points on that?
I agree, and I think in my experience, I don't know that I've really seen my crew members act inappropriately in that regard, but if they do get close to doing that or maybe making jokes, I always bring it back to that we have professional standards and that we are to act professionally, and I try to lead by example, showing them that that's not acceptable, those kinds of things, and that's more or less in a broad sense. And I think a lot of this often comes back to that LGBT people are no different than anybody, any other member of the public that we serve.
Great. This leads me into
Larry,
yeah, Jonah,
if I could
ahead.
just quickly,
Please.
I appreciate you idea, particularly where Lana was just going. This isn't just about LGBT issues. This has got to be the change in our culture around race, around gender, around everything. So that it's just not acceptable that we are professions. We are professionals. But the piece I guess I wanted to add is that this is putting all the onus on the LGBT members to interrupt this. And for me, it would be much more appreciated and probably more effective if our straight allies who were at that scene, and we do know that this is happening across the country, we know that there are horrific examples of homophobia and transphobia being offered on scenes, whether it be fire or rescue or EMS. But this is the time where our straight allies take responsibility to step up and they go to the person who's made the comment. It shouldn't have to always be us.
That's an excellent point, Jonah. And I think that's really important for all of us who are on the call and wanting to create a supportive environment. And that really is a great opening to the next question, and that is how can leadership create an environment, a culture within a department that makes it safe enough and supportive enough for somebody to come out at work? Any one of the panel members want to tackle that?
I'll give it a shot. I think one of the things that that can be done is to destigmatize the LGBT community. You know, unless somebody has a direct personal relationship with somebody who may be LGBT, a lot of times all they know is what they see on television or what is portrayed in the media, which sometimes is good, but a lot of times is not accurate, even when they try to be coming from a place of understanding that sometimes they just don't have accurate information. So just, you know, knowing that we're just like everybody else, that in, you know, reality there is no difference short of who it is that we're attracted to or what gender we may be. So I think just giving that kind of destigmatizing would be very helpful. Also, the I'm sorry, I kind of lost my train of thought there.
It's about creating a safe environment at work.
Right. Basically, not allowing the you know, the opportunity for harassment. You know, educating everybody on what harassment looks like, because sometimes it may not be the blatant in your face, you know, calling somebody a faggot. It might be something, you know, much smaller than that. I think that would be very helpful. And don't tolerate discrimination. You know, if somebody's trying to get promoted, let's promote them based purely on their skills, not, you know, what their sexual orientation might be or something like that.
Great. Lana, Jona?
Well, I think just picking right up on that point about harassment is that having codified, you know, very strict rules against harassment that are posted and very clear. And I know the City of Columbus has that. And so I think everyone knew what was expected of them, and that harassment of any type would not be tolerated.
Lana, can you share a little bit about what happened in Columbus and how labor and management worked together to create a safe environment?
Well, my first step was to visit my employee assistance program, which is administered through the health department. And there I was able to speak to a counselor. And as a company officer, you know, I already knew and was well versed with the policies of our EAP, in that anything I said to her was strictly confidential and that I would be protected. And that gave me the confidence to know that I could take that first step. So I think that's very, very important. I don't know how far you want me to go.
Well, just talk a little bit about your experience with labor and management both being supportive, because I think that that's really important for other departments to hear.
Okay, well, the next thing after that was my counselor and I formed a transition team, and I came out to some of my supervisors who were very supportive, and we went to the chief of the division. And in that meeting, he gave me his full support, and Chief Pettis at the time, he's now retired, but he told me he wanted me to be a success story. And but at the same time, I was a little frustrated because he also made it clear that he couldn't treat me with any special treatment, that I was like any other employee. So the first decision that we had to make was how do I announce my upcoming change to everyone? You know, I was like, you know, I wasn't allowed to use our official email to do a blast email or a personal thing like that. And so my deputy chief suggested that we use our labor union. Local 67 had a private message board. And at first I'm like, are you kidding? And he said, no, that's perfect. You want everyone to know. He said, it'll only take 2 days. And he was right. I composed a letter. I put it out on the message board, and in 2 days it had over 1,000 hits. And as I talked about earlier, my union president, Jack Reel, was very supportive and very insightful, right there at the beginning, to realize that, even though that was a well-meant joke that the one guy had posted, that it was important to set the tone that I was not fair game. I know I did hear through the grapevine later on that some of the guys had concern about me, and they had asked the union president, what are we going to do about Captain Moore? And that's when Jack took a real good leadership stance and said, well, what do you mean, what are we going to do? She's a human being. We're going to treat her as such. She's one of us. She's our sister. And so, I mean, that, that just goes to show with the chief and with Jack that the barriers that can just vanish when key people do the right thing.
So it's absolutely critical that leadership, both from labor and management, are supportive.
Oh yes, absolutely, and I know that I was extremely fortunate, because I've heard stories from around the country of people whose experience did not go as smoothly as mine did.
Jonah, do you have any thoughts at all about creating a safe environment, an inclusive environment?
Sure. Both Lana and Brett referred to this, but part of it's pretty simple, depending on the politics of the community, and that is to make sure that your anti-discrimination policy includes lesbians and gay men and bisexuals and trans folks. And I would say, just take a look at your policies. Are those groups included? And then if they're not, make sure they are, and then make that public. It's one of the pieces that make it public to the department as well as to the community, because part of this, the reason we're trying to create this safe environment at work is so that we can meet our mission better, and that's serving the rest of our community. So making sure that the community knows that we are making progress on this issue. The second thing would be, again, Lana referred to this as well, but there have to be clear expectations for our personnel, whether volunteer or career. And volunteer, we don't have any labor representation, but the expectations have to be clear, and those have to come from the top. And the other thing that has to come from leadership is role modeling. Role modeling, challenging your own self, doing some self-reflection, doing some self-education. If you make a mistake with language, you make a mistake, whatever, you clean it up. Leadership's got a role model cleaning that up. I think a huge piece is training and education. We have to offer our folks, not as punitive, not because somebody said something that got them in trouble, but proactively making sure that we're offering some education on all of these issues, whether it be race, gender, orientation, but to make sure that our folks get the opportunity to also, as Chief told Lana, to be successful. We want our personnel to be successful on all these issues as well, whether we have any people of color, whether we have any women, whether we have any LGBT personnel yet on the department. Let's do that education. Let's change the culture. Let's make the culture inclusive before we ask other folks to join. And a piece to me that goes back to making it public that you'll probably talk, and I'll save it, it's talking more about community and safe environment at work.
Thanks, Jonah. We got a couple of comments in, and I don't know if you can see them in the chat box or not, but Paul Flippen talked about the fact that it really is about leadership and about professionalism. And Paul, your comment is well taken. It's at all levels, the lieutenant, captain, deputy chief level. And it's, when I introduced the poll question from Paul, Paul is a retired deputy fire chief, so he really understands the leadership issues. We also got a very interesting comment that I want to share from Dana Woodward, who also transitioned on the job. And Dana's comment is, when I came out to the department, I started with my chief, and he was very cool about it. And then she came out to a few guys and told them, and once that happened, then everybody knew. And now everybody is really there to protect her. So congratulations. I think that that's another success story that I want to make sure that that we are able to share and really learn from. Another comment that Dana had made that I think is really important, she said that some of the people consider her as gay because she dates guys. And she asked, does anybody have comments about that? Dana has transitioned from male to female, and she's now dating men. And as I cited her comment, a lot of people think or perceive her as being gay. So if you've got any thoughts on that, please chat those in. Or if you have a question for the panel members about it. Why is it important? Why is it important to be able to come out? There's a lot of criticism, I think, that I have heard about. Well, why does somebody need to make this known at work? Work is not about this. What you do on your own time is up to you. So why is this important for somebody to be able to feel safe about coming out? Panel members?
Well, I think the fire service is much more than a workplace. It's like a family, and I don't think any family can be fully functional if any of its members are made to feel as though they have to hide something as basic as their authentic self.
Also, I'd like to just add that you have to also look at it from our standpoint. In virtually every conversation, straight people are coming out all the time by virtue of them speaking of their family, their children, their home life. So that's something that I think that they don't realize when they talk about us as LGBT individuals coming out. Just by virtue of us talking about what we did that weekend, if we were with our partner and so on and so forth, it's kind of an unavoidable situation. So that's one aspect. But the other aspect is just your mental well-being. For me, when I was in the closet before I came out on the job, it was just terrifying because everything I did, I had to look over my shoulder. Everything that I said had to come through a filter before it came out of my mouth, because I was afraid that once that information was out, what the ramifications were. So when you're trying to hide that from somebody, it really takes a toll on you mentally and physically. And to be able to get that weight lifted off your shoulder and not be worried about if somebody sees you out at the grocery store with your partner, what may happen. So by us coming out, we're able to control that. We're able to do it on our terms and not somebody else's terms. And I think that's very important for us. And I think it also helps in people's reaction to how they perceive that news of us being LGBT. We're able to sit down and have a conversation with them and explain to them, what it's like to be LGBT, as opposed to them just finding out and not maybe having that person to talk to get a better understanding. So I think all around it's a much better situation, and I think everybody has a much better education in the end by us coming out.
Great. Jonah, any thoughts?
Well, I want to agree with both the other panelists, absolutely, and I'd pick up on Brett's comment about the fear aspect. There is I have a strong belief that no firefighter or EMS provider can perform our very best if we're constantly hiding, if we're constantly fearful of what's going to happen if I slip and use the wrong pronoun, or talk about my partner being ill, or whatever it may be. They could risk me coming out if I'm not safely out. I mean, certainly in my life I've had other lesbian friends who were shot and killed, so there's some, you don't know what the response is going to be. so not only do I lose, and as Brett said, it takes a huge toll to try to maintain that hiding, the not coming out, but it means also, again, the fire service loses, the mission loses, because I'm not able to perform at 110%, as we all need to be able to do. The second piece, though, I think, why coming out is so important, and I would say not just individual LGBT folks within the service coming out, but the department coming out as an ally to the LGBT community. And that's, again, going back to our mission and serving the community. And if we have out members of our department, if we are publicly out as a department and supportive, that's going to go an incredibly long way to being able to do everything from better patient care to better prevention education in all of our communities. We have that link. It is a way, I think, that we could stop teen suicide in our communities, because the fire service are still seen, firefighters are still seen as the most respected vocation in the country every year, in every poll that goes out there. And if our young people who are struggling with their sexuality get to recognize that somewhere in the public they see their heroes of the community, the firefighters and EMS providers, and also that some of them are gay, that's going to go a long way to saving lives, and frankly, that's what we're in this business for.
So that there's actually a value proposition in a fire department having representation from the LGBT community. Is that correct?
Absolutely, just as having representation from every spirituality community, every community of color, etc. within our communities, that linkage is going to allow us to do our job better, whether it be actual response or prevention and education. That linkage is going to be huge.
It's great. A conversation that comes up a lot is about myths, stories that keep getting perpetuated about members of the LGBT community. Can the panel address what some of those myths are and some ways of possibly addressing it so that we don't continue to perpetuate them? Anyone can start.
Okay, well, I think one of the myths, trans people are portrayed oftentimes on TV and in movies as somebody that's up to some kind of deviant behavior, is mentally unstable. You know, like I'm thinking of Dressed to Kill, Silence of the Lambs. A lot of the TV shows like CSI and stuff are showing us in a bad light, and I think people need to realize it doesn't matter whether you're talking about anybody in the alphabet soup there, that we're all human beings, and I think people stereotype what they don't understand, and trans people are like any other group of people on the planet. As a group, we're a variety of people. We're firefighters, wrestlers, bodybuilders, hair designers, singers. Chaz Bono is a public figure. So I think that's the myth that I think bothers me. And I think some of the feedback I got is a lot of people thought at first that I had some kind of mental problem, that I had kind of just whacked out. But trans people, most of us are this way our entire life. And I think, as Jonah mentioned, it's not a choice. And the same goes for lesbians and gays. It's who we are. And we've been in a society where we've had to hide it as we grew up in the 60s and 70s and 80s, and get really good at hiding it. So I think people, when I came out, they just couldn't imagine. I didn't have one person that told me, you know, it all makes sense now. Not one single person ever suspected that I was anything other than what I projected as a normal heterosexual male fire captain. So it took a while to break down some of those myths, and people just, you know, you can read things, you can hear things, but you really learn it when you experience it. And I think people quickly saw that I wasn't going to show up to work, you know, in some strange wig and strange clothes or something.
Brett, any thoughts about some of the myths that you've either heard or dealt with?
I think one of the stereotypes, at least for a gay male, is that you're, for one, that you are not going to be capable of doing a physically demanding job as being in the fire service, and that you're generally, you know, most people assume that, oh, you're gay, that means you're going to work in retail, or you're going to be a hairdresser, or, you know, whatever the case is. But it's, you know, I think that they just don't quite understand that your sexuality has absolutely nothing to do with that aspect of your life. You know, my interests, you know, yes, some of them happen to revolve around the fact that I'm gay, but the majority of them have absolutely nothing to do with my sexuality. That is just one small component of who I am as a person, and it has no side effects or no detrimental effects on how I perform as a firefighter. So I think that's one of the biggest misconceptions, and I know Jonah has a couple of good ones that she was going to share that I think we're going to let her speak about.
Brett, before we jump to Jonah, one of the myths that I think that you might be able to address is that there is fear that a gay man is going to either be try to recruit other male firefighters in some kind of a romantic relationship, or change them, or that they feel threatened. Can you address that?
The way that I generally respond to that is I try and put that person in the same shoes. Just because you might be identifying as a straight individual does not mean that you're going to be attracted to every female firefighter that you work with. It's just a fact of life. You're not attracted to everybody that's around you just because they're the same sex or the sex that you're generally attracted to. So the two really have nothing to do with each other. Your attraction to another individual, you know, if it's a gay person attracted to another male or a straight person attracted to a female, you know, there's policies in place that address that already, that, you know, you do not fraternize in the workplace, plain and simple, no matter what your sexuality is. And I think as long as everybody adheres to those policies, that's a complete non-issue. And just as a funny anecdote, most of the people that I work with, I would, you know, a lot of them are in good shape, but a lot of them, let's be honest, aren't the best looking or in the best shape. So,
Brett, one of the participants, Jane Struling, sent in a question, and she said, "What about the myth that gay people are predatory?"
In my experience, that's completely false. I think one reason people might assume that or might see that is because we, whether you call it gaydar or whatever, a lot of times we have the ability to kind of sense that somebody may be different than what the projection that they have is. And a lot of times, you know, we may try and put ourselves out there and try and let them know that, you know, hey, you can talk to me, and, you know, I'll keep it confidential, because we know what that person is struggling with, and we're all there in one point in time in our own lives, and we hate to see somebody else having to face those same difficulties that we did, and we try and make ourselves available to ease those pains and those burdens. And I could see how somebody maybe could consider that as a recruitment kind of thing, but it's really not. And at least in my experience, and me personally, that we're no more predatory than a straight individual, and that's completely just not a true, statement.
So basically what you're saying is that your sexual orientation, there are people across the board who fall into any group, whether they be Caucasian males or African Americans or LGBT. There are going to be some good people and some people who are not necessarily good, right?
Absolutely.
Yeah. Jonah, any thoughts? I know that you've done a lot of training about some of the myths and breaking the myths.
No, you can't.
Well, I think
Well, that's for that. That's fine.
yeah, somebody's got their mic open.
This is
Yeah.
this your hook.
But this is too tough to this.
Oh man, you sure are.
You know what I'm saying? That's what
And I call
Can
you
you
any more adapters.
Okay. Yeah.
Oh, you still hooked to this?
Yeah. And
Hang on just a
you
second.
hear-
We'll mute them.
yeah, okay.
Yeah. Okay.
We good? Technology.
Okay. Okay, Jonah.
Okay. A couple of things I wanted to pick up. Thank you, Brett and Lana. Those are great breaking down of some of these. The choice one, which the three of us had talked about earlier, I just wanted to clarify for folks. And part of the objective of the webinar, I think, for all of us, was to be able to offer people tools. How do I address some of these issues? And certainly the issue, well, it's a choice, is something that lots of people have heard or will hear. And maybe the conversation that would be helpful is to recognize, is to go back to that early slide that we did, that sexual orientation is simply one aspect of our humanness, as is our gender identity and gender expression. Didn't have a choice about my sexual orientation. Where the choice actually comes in is back to what we were talking about earlier, is I can choose to come out and be my authentic self, in Lana's language, or I can choose to hide. That's the choice I have. My sexual orientation, no different than my biological sex or my gender identity, is a choice I have. How I act that out, how I live that out, that's where the choice comes in. One of the most serious myths that's out there, I want to address two that really significantly impact our abilities to do our mission and to be able to recruit. Not in the ways that you were using the term recruit. But the first one is the whole notion, and this is particularly said of lesbians and gay men, but it also gets said about folks that are transgender, transsexual, and also sometimes about bisexual people. And that's the notion that we are sexual predators of children, that all lesbian and gay people, the myth out there is that we shouldn't be around children as parents, as nurses, as EMS providers, whatever, because we're lesbian or gay, and because we're pedophiles. And I want to offer, again, there's a lot more information out there, but we actually have statistics on this, and we won't bore anybody with the statistics now, but lots of organizations have done a lot of research on this, and the actuality of sexual predators in the United States anyway is 95% or more of the people who are sexually assaulting our children are heterosexual males. So we need to really, and they are assaulting little girls and little boys, because pedophilia is a crime, a sexual violent crime that has nothing to do with sexual orientation. So just want to put that one out there. We need to break that down, because some departments have had to deal with when folks come out, particularly if they're running an EMS call on a young person, comments come back from the public, and the department needs to be able to answer that. The piece about recruiting that I wanted to offer, we often talk about how difficult it is to recruit women into the fire service, into this traditional male bastion. And one of the reasons we're having so much trouble doing that is the whole notion that any woman going into a male-dominated field must be lesbian. so we have to be able to, if we're trying to deal with the sexism involved in that, we have to also deal with the homophobia and take that on. And I would say, just as an aside from my own life, many, many years ago when I was first invited to attend the International Women in Fire and Emergency Services, I was succumbing to the stereotype as well, and I thought, wow, this will be a great opportunity to meet a whole bunch of lesbians because there'll be all these women firefighters there. Let me just say, I was extremely disappointed. the numbers, the numbers were not at all what even I expected, and so we all follow from that stereotype. So we need to deal with the homophobia and the transphobia as well if we're going to be successful in recruiting women into the fire service.
That's great. You know, a very quick comment is that this is really a journey, and I know that that gets used and overused, but it really is about learning as we go. And I just realized in my question when I asked Brett, I did use the word recruit, and I think that that really carries some emotional value to it, and so I will be much more careful even in asking my questions about trying to get to some of the points here. And I really realized it because the last question, we've got just 5 minutes, that I wanted to talk about. We talked about how having more LGBT firefighters can help a department to be a better department. We can better serve the community both in emergency response, in prevention and community risk reduction efforts, in emergency management efforts, simply because we have those networks, we understand some of the needs. What are some of the things that a department, the participants who are on the call, should think about in terms of recruiting LGBT qualified, inclusive, diverse, and safety-conscious firefighters and emergency responders?
I think one thing I'd like to say is that develop a pool of individuals who are open-minded and or who maybe are LGBT themselves or who have family or friends who are LGBT to be the ones to go out and actually, you know, say go to a gay pride event or to hold an event at a pride center to show off, you know, maybe just bring some of the trucks there and show off the equipment and so on. There are a lot of LGBT individuals who have kids, so it'd be a great opportunity for the kids to come and see the equipment and trucks and everything. But try to recruit your individuals within your department who are open-minded and who are willing to go into these scenarios and to recruit the people, and that will show, you know, they'll be more interactive with the individuals that are there at the event. You know, when you take somebody just and arbitrarily assign them to that event, they may not be comfortable there, and that's going to show to the members that are there from the community. So always try and develop a pool of individuals from whatever your diversity group is that are going to be able to portray, you know, that they want to be there, not that they're being forced there by their department.
Lana?
Yeah, I think that's great, what Brett was just saying, including your community relations people with your recruitment. I know I spoke with our officer who's in recruitment, and I know they placed an ad in a gay publication the last time that civil service was accepting applications. So I mean that's something in addition to what Brett has said.
Jonah?
All of the above that they've just mentioned, absolutely. And I think for departments that have a fairly substantially sized community, you know, the bigger cities anyway, but even a lot of the small towns, I know even here in rural northern New Mexico, there would be potential organizations to link with. So making a linkage between the fire department and the local LGBT center, making a linkage with the fire department and and PFLAG, Parents and Friends of Lesbians and Gays, that also include transgender folks at this point as well. Having those linkages so that when, if we go back to the prevention or we go back to some kind of emergency preparedness, that we already know the folks at that community. They already trust us in some way. We've had some communication in the past, so it's not just now it's an emergency, we need to talk to somebody. I think, as I said before, making our stand public, making our visibility as a department, as an ally to the LGBT community public, that people actually know. And that's got to be consistent, and it's going to take some time to develop trust like any other community. Like if you've got a primarily white or all-white fire department, it's going to take some time and some consistency, and ally behavior to gain the trust of the community of colors in our areas. I'm thinking there are models out there. I know that FBU, the Fire Brigades Union in the UK, I know that some of the brigades there have produced wonderful documents in their recruiting efforts, and I know there's a couple of pages in their documents that gay or lesbian firefighters talking about their lives. They're in uniform. They're saying, "I'm gay, and I'm a firefighter." So it's pretty overt. I think there's lots of ways. But lastly,
Jonah?
Yes, sir. Done.
No, you're breaking up, and I have a feeling that it's the internet connection in Latir, New Mexico. But you were breaking up, so it was difficult to hear what you were saying. So we'll try to capture some of it in the notes.
Okay.
We're getting a lot of echo from you right now. So I really want to thank the panel members. Brett, Lana, do you have any final comments at all?
I just want to thank everybody for participating in this webinar and taking the time out of their busy days to explore this, explore the LGBT community as a possible recruitment pool for the fire service.
Lana?
I also just would like to thank everyone and my fellow panelists, and thank you for having me on.
That's great. Jonah, I don't know if you're still echoey.
Testing. How is this?
Still echoey.
Okay. Well, just thank you, everybody.
Okay, thank you. I'm going to turn this back over to Cammie. She'll talk a little bit about how you can all get copies of this. And I just want to say that Brett and Lana and Jonah have again offered to be resources. We'll have contact information. Jonah does workshops around North America, and including has done some things in the UK, and we've had the opportunity to work in partnership. We just finished a training program up in Ottawa. So if you're interested in having some workshops in your department, please feel free to contact us and we can put something together. Thank you again, and let me turn it back over to Ms. Cammie Higa.
All right, everyone. Thank you so much for attending our webinar today. Please visit the materials section after the webinar. You will also get a follow-up email that will contain links to all the information we have in the materials section. We do have 2 articles, one from Columbus, Ohio, about their policies on LGBT. We also have the slide that Jonah talked about with all the terminology available, so you can look at that as well as the biographies for panelists if you'd like more information. If you do have any additional questions, or if you have any ideas for other topics you'd like us to do a webinar on, please feel free to email us at ff@fire2020.org. Notes and a recording of the webinar will be available to all of the attendees, and we'll send that out in an email as well. So once again, thank you to everyone for participating in today's webinar. Please take the time to answer our 5-question evaluation. It'll pop up when we end the training, and it will also be in the follow-up email that you will receive later today. Once again, thank you to our sponsors, and thank you to our great, amazing panelists. That's all we have for you today. Once again, any questions, just let us know. Please have a great day. Thank you so much.